I'd like to thank Bob Wassell of MMTV for filming this event. He's going to post it on MMTV and on the MMTV YouTube channel. So in a couple of weeks, look for that and tell all your friends who missed out that they could enjoy it that way. But tonight, we are so happy to have Douglas Heath and Alison Simcox here to talk about their new book, Walls, Rock, and Rum. Their new research for this work has been published for the first time. Doug and Alison are environmental scientists with an interest in local history. Alison Simcox recently retired from the US EPA as a specialist in air quality. In 1998, she was the second woman to receive a doctorate in engineering from Tufts University. She is on the board of directors. Oh, clapping. She is on the board of directors of the Saugus River Watershed Council. Douglas Heath is a history researcher, a U.S. Navy veteran. He worked at the U.S. Geological Survey and U.S. EPA for 30 years, protecting drinking water supplies in New England. He is a certified interpretive guide. He is vice president of the Saugus River Watershed Council, and they both lead history walks for the Friends of the Middlesex Fells. Alison and Doug have written 6 books, including Middlesex Fells and the Lost Mill Village of Middlesex Fells, and they have also written trail guides for the Virginia Wood and Bellevue Pond areas of the Fells. They'll have books available for purchase and signing after the presentation. Cash or check will be accepted for payment. I forgot to tell you who I am. I am Diane Wall, the Assistant Director here at the library, and I welcome you, and please join me in welcoming Alison Simcox and Douglas Heath.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. This is a very nice turnout. This is just a beautiful renovation of this library. We're really thrilled to be able to present here. I love the high tech.
Oh my God, we got to work.
And you're doing very well with it. Thank you, Diane, for inviting us. I have to have a caveat at the beginning. Doug and I flew back from England last night, so I am totally jet lagged. Doug might be too. So it may show in the presentation. So before we begin, I want to give you some background on how we came to write the book. Doug and I have been writing history books for about 15 years. And we focus on places that are well known, but whose history is less well known. These include Lake Quannapowitt, that was our first book, Breakheart Reservation, and Middlesex Fells, as well as a mill village that once existed along Spot Pond Brook on the eastern side of Middlesex Fells. And that village, which was locally known as Haywardville, was one of the first mill villages in the country. So that's a fascinating tale, and it's now an archaeological district. Let's see. Go up there. So our research on Breakheart revealed a sensational murder that took place in 1900, and it gripped the North Shore of Boston for months. So, because people were always interested in hearing about the murder, when we talked about the Breakheart book, we thought, oh, well, let's see if we can try our hand at a true crime book. And so we did one called Murder at Breakheart Hill Farm, which has turned out to be our bestseller because people love crime. During the pandemic, we noticed that more and more people were getting out into the woods. I mean, it was quite remarkable. So we decided to write a couple of trail guides. We wrote one on the Lost Mill Village and another one on the Pine Hill area of the Southern Fells. And the current book is our 6th book, Walls, Rock, and Rum. And that was published just a few days ago. In fact, the boxes of books arrived on our doorstep while we were in England. Our neighbor was nice enough to bring them into the garage for us. So you have the privilege of hearing this talk for the first time. And by the way, all of our books and the trail guides will be available after this talk. So, mentioned all those. Walls, Rock, and Rum is definitely our most ambitious project. It focuses on the entire Charlestown territory, which once covered 78 square miles and now includes, as you can see here, parts of about 10 cities and towns. They include Medford, Malden, Stoneham, Winchester, Woburn, Burlington, Wilmington, Cambridge, and Arlington, and right here in Melrose. So this was all part of the Charlestown territory at one time. So now I'm going to pass this on to Doug. Go.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
That's great. I love this technology. So Charlestown itself was much smaller than its territory and was situated in the Michigan Peninsula, as you can see it right up there at the top, just north of the Shelma Peninsula, which we now know as Boston. In fact, Charlestown is now incorporated into Boston. This map shows Charlestown in 1775, before the harbor was extensively filled. Charlestown territory closely follows the boundaries of the Mystic River watershed, shown here. Our book began with a simple question: where did the stone walls of Middlesex Fells come from? Alison and I have done a lot of hiking in the fells, and we noticed long, straight walls that...
Point out the fells.
that
Point out where the fells is there on the map.
right. Fells is this green area right up here. I-93 goes right through it. And many people don't realize when they're heading north to skiing in New Hampshire at 70 miles an hour, they're actually going right through one of the most important forest areas in the country. But after trying to answer the simple question, where did the walls in Middlesex Fells come from, we soon discovered that to explain the origin of the walls, we had to go back to the beginning of colonial history, when the Puritans arrived in Massachusetts Bay. The story is one of transformation of the land, semi-wilderness, inhabited by native peoples, to a landscape that mirrored the English countryside. So we describe the origin of the walls of Middlesex Fells by a way of a journey through time that traces events that, fortunately for nature lovers, result in the preservation of these walls to the present day. So let's start at the beginning. For thousands of years, Native Americans inhabited the land. For hundreds of years, they lived in settlements that may have looked like the one shown in this diorama on the left of a Pawtucket village beside the Merrimack River. Daily life focused on activities such as planting, hunting, fishing, preparing food, and making tools. Some arrowheads and tools from the Medford Historical Society's collection are shown here. In the 16th century, native peoples began trading with European explorers along the coast, but these interactions also introduced diseases. In the early 17th century, a major epidemic swept through southeastern New England, killing much of the native coastal population. At this time, Nanepeshemet was sachem of the Massachusetts tribe and leader of the Pawtucket Confederation. This included a large area of what is now eastern Massachusetts. In 1616, he was living near the banks of the Mystic River in what is now Medford. 3 years later, he was killed by a rival tribe, possibly the Micmac tribe from Maine, and leadership of the Massachusetts tribe passed to his widow, shown here, the Song-Squaw Amissatuk, formerly and inappropriately known as Squaw Sachem. This sculpture of the Sachem by the famous sculptor Cyrus Dallin is in front of the Arlington Town Hall.
About the time that the Squaw Mystic became the tribal leader, on the other side of the Atlantic, over in England, they had other plans. They were forming plans for a Puritan colony in Massachusetts Bay. These plans had religious motives, but they were also commercial. In 1623, the Puritan clergyman, John White, shown here, helped found the Dorchester Company. The goal was to establish a settlement that could profit from fish and fur from New England. The Dorchester Company was renamed the New England Company. 5 years later, the Council for New England, which was a group that had a royal charter, granted the New England Company land that extended from 3 miles north of the Merrimack River to 3 miles south of the Charles River. This is why, to this day, the border between Massachusetts and New Hampshire is not the Merrimack River, but is a few miles north of it. This grant was awarded without any consideration of the native peoples that occupied the land. In 1628, the New England Company sent a group of settlers to Nomkay, which is now known as Salem. It was led by John Endicott, who's shown here, a very strict Puritan. Not much fun to be with. The following year, King Charles signed a charter for the Massachusetts Bay Colony. In this charter, the New England Company was renamed the Massachusetts Bay Company, and Matthew Craddock, shown here, was named its first governor. Craddock was a director of the East India Company, which was a British company that famously evolved from a commercial venture into an imperial power. In 1629, Craddock proposed transferring the Massachusetts Bay Company's charter from London to the colony itself, allowing the settlers to govern independently. This proposal had far-reaching consequences for the development of colonial self-rule. Okay, that same year, about 30 of Craddock's agents arrived with Reverend Francis Higginson's fleet in Salem. Among these agents, he sent engineers, carpenters, shipwrights, wheelwrights, woodcutters, coopers, shoemakers, tanners, fullers, ironworkers, sawmill operators, and merchants. They meant business. The land encountered by the Puritans differed dramatically from what they had left behind in England. The settlers came searching for marketable goods, fish, fur, and timber, that could be shipped back to England for profit. What they found was a land of incredible abundance. But abundance can be understood in different ways. To native peoples, the land and its bounty of plants and animals, its waterways and fish, were viewed as communal resources, not as commodities. To the English settlers, ecosystems were seen as containing raw materials, fish to export, trees to cut, clay to fire, stone to quarry, and land to divide. As a result, early descriptions of New England reflect the expectations of English markets more than the region's actual ecology. Say, for example, Francis Higginson, who wrote fairly extensively about the early colony, wrote, "This country aboundeth naturally with stores of roots of great variety and good to eat. Our turnips, parsnips, and carrots are here bigger and sweeter than is ordinarily found in England." About wildlife, he wrote, "For beasts there are some bears, and they say some lions also, for they have been seen at Cape Ann. Also, here are several sorts of deer, some whereof bring 3 or 4 young ones at once, which is not ordinary in England. Also, wolves, foxes, beavers, otters, martens, great wild cats, and a great beast called the moose," which is actually the moose. And that's as big as an ox. In 1634, explorer William Wood marveled at the springtime migrations of alewives in such multitudes as is almost incredible, pressing up such shallow waters as will scarce permit them to swim. He was also struck by the profusion of birds. "If I could tell you how some have killed 100 geese in a week, 50 ducks at a shot, 40 teals at another, it may be counted impossible, though nothing more certain." For settlers accustomed to the deforested landscapes of England, New England's towering forests were astounding. In 1630, John Winthrop, who had been named governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, as opposed to governor of Massachusetts Bay Company, which was Matthew Craddock. Matthew Craddock never came to the colony, but John Winthrop did, and he was the first governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony. He landed in Salem, but he soon traveled with other Puritans to the Michigan Peninsula, which they called Charlestown. In 1639, he reached out to the Sashwa of Mystique to purchase, in quotes, her land through a deed. However, this deed, like many others, may have been more coerced than consensual. The native peoples had suffered devastating losses due to disease and tribal rivalries, and were now in a position of unequal power, where the Puritans had the advantage. They also had a very different understanding of land ownership. Native leaders understood agreements in terms of shared use and coexistence, while the English saw treaties as permanent legal transfers of ownership. Some of you may have seen this mural. It's at the Winchester Public Library. It was created by Aidan LaSalle Ripley in 1934. It shows Winthrop, Governor Winthrop, offering corn wampum, which are kind of shell, and blankets to the sachem in exchange for her land. As a result of such trades, the British claimed ownership of native lands. I'll pass it back to Doug.
However, colonial authorities were granting land even before treaties were authorized. 1631, John Winthrop received 600 acres south of the Mystic River. Donated this area right in here, which is now part of Medford. He called his plantation 10 Hills Farm. 3 years later, Matthew Craddock received 2,500 acres on the north side of the Mystic River. This grant, which is now also now part of Medford, was one of the largest in Massachusetts Bay Colony. Although Craddock never came to New England, he had instructed his agents to find a parcel of land for him near a river that could support profitable trade. 2,500 acre parcel that his agents identified for him became known as Craddock's Farm. Craddock's agents set about developing the property with a focus on fishing, brickmaking, and shipbuilding. These were all supported by the natural resources found along the river, its fish, clay deposits, and navigable waters. In 1631, the year that Winthrop obtained 10 Hills Farm, he commissioned one of the earliest ships, the Blessing of the Bay, to use for coastal trade. Craddock's men built using local white oak and white pine. According to an account written by the historian William Horace Clark in 1938, quote, "She traded regularly along the entire New England coast and around Cape Cod and Long Island, and with the Dutch on Manhattan Island. She carried to the Dutch salt from seawater, maple sugar, and probably clapboards, in exchange for molasses, sugar from the West Indies, and the spices and tea that the Dutch ships brought from the east via Amsterdam." In 1649, towns were beginning to form in the Charlestown territory and elsewhere in eastern Massachusetts. The settlers realized that they needed a method to set town boundaries, to collect taxes, and to define ownership and future development. Surprisingly, it wasn't until the 1980s that cartographers noticed that town boundaries in eastern Massachusetts radiated out from 2 focal points, one in Cape Cod Bay, shown here, and another in East Cambridge. This was described in a 2000 article called, quote, "The Ordering of Towns" by H. Morse Payne, the former head of the Lexington Historical Society. So Payne described how these focal points worked. For example, the boundaries of Barnstable, Yarmouth, and Dennis, and Wellfleet, when extended northward and westward, have a focal point in Cape Cod Bay. Payne also noticed that several towns near Boston have boundaries that radiate from a focal point. This research showed that in 1635, the General Court set the focal point in East Cambridge. These lines, which can be seen on modern maps, preserve decisions made centuries ago. Note several of the boundaries showing the radial pattern. One, for example, is the radius going from East Cambridge, dividing the line boundary between Lexington and Woburn. Another one is another line going north that separates the boundary between Medford and Malden. The area of Craddock's Farm is highlighted on this map. This western edge was Mystic Pond, which at the time was a single body of water. Today, a dam divides it into the upper and lower Mystic Lakes. The southern boundary was the Mystic River, and which is a this area right through here. And to the east were two farms owned by Increase Knoll and John Wilson. However, the northern boundary of Craddock's farm remained uncertain. And that northern boundary is right in this area right here.
Oh, okay. Anyway.
The General Court attempted to address this by declaring Craddock's farm would, quote, extend a mile into the country from the riverside in all places. This ruling, however, created real practical problems. You can notice how meandering and curving the river is in this area. They're trying to find a mile from the north, and that's be real complicated for landowners and the heads of the Mystic community.
For surveyors.
And surveyors, right. The Mystic River twisted and turned in oxbows and curves, making it impossible to measure a consistent mile from every point along the shoreline. Therefore, in 1640, the court appointed 3 men from Charlestown, William Ting, Samuel Shepherd, and the Deacon Edward Converse, to survey and mark the farm's northern boundary. This became known as the Charlestown Line. The surveyors carried a magnetic compass and a Gunter's chain. This middle chain, designed in 1620 by English engineer and mathematician Edmund Gunter, was 66 feet long with 100 links and was ideal for measuring long distances in rough conditions. And in fact, we have a chain over here. Which I can pass around if you want to look at it.
You ordered this from where, Doug?
India.
India.
You can actually buy these online. And they may still be used in India.
This is the typical Doug purchase.
But this way of measuring distances revolutionized surveying in the 17th century. And it no, you don't want to do it, because otherwise it stretches out all the way.
It stretches. You get the idea. It's
So
not,
you need a magnetic
it's not
compass.
magnetic, it's just a chain.
Right.
And you can walk through the woods with it, you can see, measure.
Is the length universal?
It is standard,
Yes,
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 standard.
it's measured in rods and poles. Yeah.
So I believe.
Yes.
Okay, so while that's going around, we'll continue here. Here's a photo that I took this winter of the Charlestown line west of Jeremiah Circle in Medford. This surviving section of line is now in Middlesex Fells. The remarkable thing is that the 17th century boundary still physically exists for nearly a full mile, despite nearby development. So this is actually quite exciting to have something like this survive over the years.
In fact, this is probably one of the oldest stone walls in New England.
In 1658, Charlestown leaders designated about 7 square miles here above Charlestown line, the northern boundary of Craddock's farm, about 7 square miles as woodlots for Charlestown residents. Because Charlestown couldn't have people just go into the woods and just remove trees, which they were doing at first, and kind of haphazardly removing trees. They had to have an orderly way of assigning areas that could be cut, because wood was all important back then. Heating, any industry needed it. It was defuel, shipbuilding, brick making, but prodigious amounts of wood were burned in oversized hearths because they were not efficiently built, the hearths that the colonials used. So about the time that this area was designated as woodlots, there were other boundaries being set. So other towns were being established. In 1642, the boundary between Woburn and Medford, over here, was set to the west of the woodlots. And in 1649, the court set the boundary between Malden and Medford to the east of the woodlots. About 1657, Charlestown designated the Charlestown line, which is here, north border of Craddock's farm, as range line number 1. And then they sent surveyors out to add 9 parallel range lines, and it goes beyond that too. There's just the first 6 shown, at 1/4 mile intervals. These surveyors are unknown, as are the people who built the walls along the surveyed lines. But our research strongly suggests that the wall builders were mostly indentured servants, because from the time that colonists first arrived, they brought servants with them. Servitude typically lasted from 1 to 12 years and was seen as an opportunity by the servants to gain skills and eventually become independent, even be given some land. Some wall builders may have been enslaved native people and Africans, but there were far fewer of them than indentured servants. We do have one documented line in a historical document that mentions that there was at least one African slave who helped build the walls. A total of 202 families were granted woodlots within this area. However, the woodlot size was not equal. The wealthiest and most prominent men of Charlestown received the largest grants. Fancy that. Poorer people, widows, and orphans received much smaller parcels. Lots ranged in size from 95 acres to 3 acres. After Craddock's death in 1641, his heirs sold his farm to Edward Collins, who then sold parcels to merchants who were connected to Medford's growing industries. This slide shows these merchants and the year that each acquired their parcel. Notice familiar name of Tufts here, and also John Hall. These merchants, they also bought many of the Charlestown woodlots from the original grantees for timber to build ships and to provide fuel for brick kilns and rum distilleries. The woodlots were particularly important for brickmaking. This was Medford's leading industry for 100 years, from about 1650 to 1750. And then it flourished again in the late 19th century. Clay-rich soils along the banks of the Mystic River and throughout low-lying areas of town supported this industry. By the early 18th century, Medford brickmakers, including the Halls, Pages, Bradshaws, owned many of the Charlestown woodlots, about 470 acres of them, and they used prodigious amounts of wood to fuel brick kilns that burned day and night. The workers dug clay from the pits in late summer, left it in piles to weather over the winter. In spring, they spread the clay on the ground and worked it until it became pliable, first by treading on it and later by using oxen or horses. These animals also powered a pug mill which forced clay through an opening that determined the brick size. Workers then cut the clay into pieces and put them into wood-fired kilns. At night, the kilns were so hot that they glowed in the dark. Workers then loaded finished bricks onto lighters, which is another name for barges, and floated them down the Mystic River to Boston. Mystic bricks were known throughout a large area. So we focused on the developing town of Medford to illustrate how colonists exploited natural resources to transform the land. Sorry. You know?
This is mine.
Yes, sorry, this is Doug's. I skipped ahead too far. So I'll pass it on to you.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
Wrong slide. Off you go. Little jet lag.
Like shipbuilding and brick making, stone was another resource that was really important to the early settlers and really became a commodity over time. Through the 17th and 19th centuries, rock quarrying took place along the Medford Dyke, shown here. It's mapped to the left, and extended to 3 miles from Powder House Square in Somerville, and turning north under Tufts University, under downtown Medford, and all the way up to Pine Hill Quarries, just west of 93, and finally pinching out just west of Wright's Pond in Medford. This rock is composed of igneous rock that intrudes the surrounding odor of granite. We actually have a sample here. We also pass around.
This was the golden rock. This was much sought after for as a building material, and this occurred along that area of the Medford Dyke, and it still does.
Right.
I still see it.
So this rock is 238
Show and tell.
million years
There you
old. And even at that age, which is quite old for most people, it's actually the youngest rock in Middlesex Fells. The older rock is 600 million years, and many years ago, 238 million years ago, a large crack opened up due to tension forces, and magma from miles below squeezed up into it, and it solidified, creating the rock that you're holding right now. Also, the main quarries that run along the dike are shown here. To the south, we have Two Penny Quarry, and also an outlying quarry, a much smaller one called Alison Quarry in Somerville. That's made of the same kind of rock, but we're not quite sure it actually continues into the main body. And then Pasture Quarry up here in the middle of Medford, and then Pineland Quarries up in the Middlesex Fells. The ecologists used stone from these quarries to build foundations, buildings, walls, bars, curbing, and roadbeds. The earliest quarry, which is shown here, was the Two Penny Quarry at the base of Powder House Square Hill in Somerville. The second quarry was established at the base of Pasture Hill in Medford, beginning in the 1840s. The largest quarries, which operate from 1836 to about 1880, were next to Pine Hill in Medford, now located in Middlesex Fells. Rock was cut using the plug and feather method, with tools shown here. Drill holes were made by double jacking, with 2 men wielding hammers and one holding a drill. I would definitely would not like to be the man holding the drill. 5 large quarries and many smaller ones can still be found along Quarry Road near Bellevue Pond in the Southern Fells. And these are identified in the left map right here, 1 all the way up to number 5. And Alison and I lead walks in this area for the Friends of Middlesex Fells. So keep an eye out if you're interested in coming on one of our walks. We'll actually visit these quarries in depth and show you what they look like and how they were formed. So here are some views of the Pine Hill quarries. One thing to point out here is 2 photographs were taken in one of the quarries, quarry number 3. This photograph here was taken in 1894 by a man named Nathaniel Stebbins, who was a well-known photographer at the time. And he had his assistant, Edward Gleason, for scale, take his place right here in the middle of the photograph. 120 years later, we took photographs in the same spot using the same locations of camera and got this view. So not a whole lot has changed. It also shows that by 1894, most of the quarries were no longer really being used. Stone was being extracted. Some of the quarries are quite high, as shown here with Alison right here providing scale. This wall here is 17 feet high. It's actually used by rock climbers from time to time.
Order this time. Okay, so
Where are these quarries?
they are in.
I'm sorry, they're in Bellevue Pond area, just north of South Porter Road and just west of Roosevelt Circle in, right, just west of 93. Quite easy to get to.
Yeah, the Southern Fells. So, I think we were doing some more here, Doug, so.
I think so.
That's right.
Let's talk about
This is a photograph of some of the large carts that's used to transport heavy stone from the quarries down to markets. One of the advantages of the Pine Hill quarries was it's all downhill from that area into Medford.
a big difference.
So frequently the carts were pulled not only by horses but also oxen.
This isn't actually in the photos.
One of the things we discovered in exploring the quarry area was that some of the early quarrymen actually carved their initials and their names at the top of Pine Hill. And I got curious about Katie because in doing research in Medford at the library there, I looked at old annual reports, and in there they list all the expenditures that were done like in 1845, 1847, and so forth. And Katie's name came up time and time again, and it was actually Frederick Katie, who's shown here at the top, much older. His father did a lot of work in Medford and gave me the clues as to who Frederick Katie might be, his son. At age 19, he actually went to the top of Pine Hill and carved his name here, not in one but two places on the peak. I was able to get his photograph through genealogical research and talking to other family members.
Okay, so we focused on the developing town of Bedford to illustrate how colonists exploited natural resources to transform the land. But the most important economic resource for them was the Mystic River. This provided the original reason for settling along its banks. The ability to build seagoing vessels allowed trade to expand along the eastern seaboard and eventually throughout the world. This map shows the major trade routes that developed. The most notorious was that for rum, which emerged as one of Medford's major industries. A trading pattern known as the triangular or Atlantic slave trade made many merchants very wealthy. So you can see the triangle here. Rum goes to Africa, where the merchants trade rum for enslaved people. They bring the enslaved people to the Caribbean, Antigua and Barbados, and trade the enslaved people for rum and molasses. And then they brought some of the slaves and the molasses up to Medford and other towns to make rum, and then the whole process started all over again.
They made rum in Medford?
They did. Medford was a big rum-making place. Still get Medford rum. So in this system, ships from Medford, so they went to, as I said, they went to West Africa, and not only carrying rum, but other goods too, and then they brought back enslaved Africans. So this was a notorious piece of history of this area, which is really not as well known as it ought to be. But there's quite a few people now that are doing research on slave trade in New England. So here's an image of enslaved Africans and native peoples harvesting sugarcane in the Caribbean. These plantations typically produce 2 crops each year in the fall and spring. After harvest, workers brought the cane to sugar mills, where rollers crushed it to extract the juice. They dried the fibrous residue and used it as fuel to boil the juice and evaporate excess water. Molasses was a byproduct of this. In the early 18th century, Isaac Royal acquired 2 sugar plantations in Antigua and was involved in the triangular trade between Antigua and Medford. In 1732, he bought about 500 acres of the former Ten Hills Farm, which you may recall was owned by John Winthrop many years before that. And he built a mansion that's known as the Royal House and Slave Quarters in Medford, which is now a museum, which is well worth visiting. This mansion was built using wood from the Charlestown woodlots. When Royal arrived in Medford, he brought at least 27 enslaved Africans with him. His son, Isaac Jr., shown here, dapper-looking fellow, became one of the wealthiest men in New England. A little bit about the rum business in Medford. Captain John Hall was actually the first to build a distillery. That was about 1715. And this was located near the Craddock Bridge, beside a spring. The town's rum business became dominated by his family and by the Lawrence family. By the 1880s, Dudley Hall, grandson of John Hall, sold his distillery to Daniel Lawrence, shown here. Lawrence renamed the distillery Daniel Lawrence and Sons, and his Old Medford rum was so well known that it was advertised as, quote, everywhere known as the standard rum. In 1879, his sons, Daniel Warren Lawrence and Samuel Crocker Lawrence, shown here. Samuel was Medford's first mayor. They took over the business and ran it until 1905. So here are some examples of Old Medford rum that was recently on display and may still be at the Medford Historical Society and Museum. By the 19th century, nearly all the forests were depleted. However, the fortuitous opening of the Middlesex Canal in 1803 brought timber south to Medford from New Hampshire. Also, bricks from Medford's clay pits were floated north to build mills in Lowell and New Hampshire. The final boat on the canal passed through Medford, April 1852. You can find remnants of the Middlesex Canal all the way from Lowell down through this area.
Charlestown.
All the way to Charlestown, that's right. Yeah, so.
Here's a wonderful bird's eye view looking south toward Medford, here circled in yellow, and Boston from the former Charlestown woodlots. Most of these woodlots are now part of Middlesex Fells. So how did the fells actually come about? In 1880, Eliza Wright, who owned Pine Hill as well as the former quarries and preservation as Wilson Flagg, co-founded the Middlesex Fells Association to lobby state legislatures to preserve the land for public use. The result of this preservation effort was the creation of the Metropolitan Park Commission, which established the Fells in 1894. The full story is given in our book, Middlesex Fells, which is one of the books we have available tonight. The following year, the Commission published this detailed map, which included the stone range lines as they existed at that time. The dashed lines here are town boundaries, and the dotted lines here are the lines of the actual stone walls as they existed back in 1895. In the winter of 2024, I mapped the range lines that exist today. Did a lot of walking, a lot of scrambling through thick briar and across swamps, but it really yielded some really great information.
You didn't get any ticks either.
No ticks?
Amazing.
Winter time's the best time to do it. You don't have a lot of poison ivy to worry about, and so forth. Of the original 20 miles of stone walls, only 5 miles remain, but this is still a significant amount of preservation.
Okay, I'd like to wrap up with some concluding remarks. For thousands of years, the land we now call Middlesex Fells was home to native peoples who lived in close relationship with the forest. Their way of life maintained an ecological balance that sustained both people and land. But when English settlers arrived in the 17th century, they came with a very different worldview. Instead of viewing land as a shared resource, They treated it as a collection of commodities to extract and exploit for profit. They turned rivers into trade routes, mudflats into clay pits for brickmaking, and forests into woodlots. Land that Native peoples had held in common was parceled out to Puritan settlers, fenced and governed under colonial laws. Entire ecosystems became patchworks of private holdings and public uses, woodlots for timber, commons for grazing, and quarries for stone, each serving a specific economic purpose. By the mid-19th century, the wild and uncouth wilderness described by early colonists had all but disappeared. Farms, towns, roads, and industry had reshaped the land to reflect the culture and values of its new inhabitants. Yet, traces of earlier ways of life remain in the old trails, stone walls, and quarries of Middlesex Fells. This transformed and fortunately preserved forest offers us a place to reflect on the many forces that have shaped it and inspires us to reconnect with nature and the spirit of the people, both native and colonial, who once lived here. So with that, thank you for coming. So I didn't go too long, but we'll field some questions.
Oh, Joan?
Is Gabbro, the Medford granite, is that unique to Medford or can it be found elsewhere?
That particular dike is one of the largest in New England, and it does occur in smaller dikes, but that one was the most profitable for.
In North America or is it?
Oh, yeah, well, there's other gabbros and diorites and dikes elsewhere, but in this region, that was the major quarrying rock.
It
course,
can be found throughout the world in many settings.
Yeah.
That's right.
Has it?
In fact, we were just in Dartmoor in southwestern England, and it has virtually the same type of rock dikes there. So we were kind of marveling at, here we go from New England over to England, and actually the rock types are very similar, because actually they were once part of the same land. So
A lot of people know about the salt. This is a dark rock that is very fine grain. You barely see the crystals.
the salt, yeah.
Salt, but the gabbro is made of the same composition. It comes from the same source deep within the mantle, like miles below. But the fact that it didn't reach the ground surface meant it cooled much more slowly, therefore allowing the crystal to grow a lot larger.
Yeah.
So it never really was on the surface until after all this millions of years of erosion finally exposed it.
We have a whole geology walk if you're interested. So, yes.
Is anything being done to preserve those last 5 miles of stone walls?
Well, yeah, just the fact that they are within a preserved area of the Middlesex Fells, but they serve no function now as boundary lines. So, yes, in the sense that nothing in the fells is supposed to be altered or removed, but they are now preserved. Yep. Well, we do have invasive plants that come in, and we try to clear some of those out. DCR, in association with Friends of the Fells, it does work to continue trying to keep the ecology, as preserved as possible.
Thank you.
2 years ago, when the Winchester reservoirs were drained, Turkey's swamp, well, there were a number of stone walls that were running through it. Would those have been the originals?
Yes, those are range lines that were flooded by the Winchester reservoirs.
And also, on the west side, in the Winchester woods, there's, in my opinion, the best preserved rock walls, stone walls. And then, at the same height, they're probably 3 feet, 4 feet high there. Up on the north side where Doleful Pond is, there's an area in there where in winter, where I've noticed some, again, the same height.
So the Doleful Pond right up here.
Yeah,
Stone, yeah.
so you go in from Pond Street, that first gate, and we had the gate, it was convenient.
Yeah.
Drive through there.
Some of the stone walls were destroyed when Spot Pond was redeveloped into a reservoir for
Yes.
the northern distribution system for Boston.
A lot of the stone was cannibalized to make riprap, shoreline.
They just put it
stabilize
around it.
things. And the construction of I-93 in 1959, 1960, a lot of rock was removed. The longest stone wall we were able to find was this one down here, number 2. This is 1.2 miles long. It was originally, 2 miles long, stretched all the way from the Winchester border here all the way over to the border of Malden, or this location right here. Because of all subsequent development,
Yeah, I-93, you can see it running through.
Malden Highlands, this is all built up, suburbia.
Yeah, they've all been removed in that area.
Now, if there are any stone walls which I've seen running, let's say, south to north, north to south,
Yes.
would those have been property markers after these walls?
After the 10 range lines were put in, as you know, the 202 families were granted woodlots. And so these were all marked off by north-south walls, called meridional walls,
Meridional
which came a
walls,
little bit later. They're not the original ones, but they were also critical in defining the landscape and finding parcels
You
that
didn't map those though.
I didn't map those. It would take a lot of work.
There-
You could
the
do
ones
it,
that
but it
I've
would be a
seen
lot of
are
work.
just one rock, and you might see 20 rocks
Mhm.
going in the same direction, and then I use my imagination.
Right.
Yeah, some of them, you have to know where they were, and then you see, oh, okay, there's a rock, and they're scattered, frost and thaw, freezing thaw. And we're talking hundreds of years, and, many forces can cause those rock walls to fall down, but,
When the rocks were first surveyed, of course, they used a compass, as we showed in an earlier slide, but that had like a 15-degree, declination. That was where the magnetic North Pole was at that time.
Yeah.
And that's why these
but they're.
walls here are not east to west exactly. They're all tilted by that, not because they used a compass rather than using true north to lay them out.
Again, at the Winchester Reservoir, there were walls that had 90-degree turns.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah, I mean, these are properties, they were granted to these 200 odd families, and those people could then do what they wanted within, the bounds of their property. So sometimes they might put an animal enclosure in there, sometimes they might divide it up between family members. So yeah, there are other walls, but the main range lines, were as shown here.
Thank you.
Sure.
The families that were there, what happened to them? Were they moved, did this Commonwealth, the county take like eminent domain or just?
Oh, when Middlesex Fells was built?
Yeah, I mean, the 200 families,
Founded?
did they buy it, were they bought off?
Yeah, well, the 200 families, a lot of they sold their lots to merchants in Medford,
Before the Fells was developed.
before the Fells was
Right.
developed. So they never bought them, so they became property of these families, and then, a merchant would want a woodlot, and they would approach the owners and buy lots from them. A lot of prominent names ended up owning the woodlots, a lot of the prominent names of Medford merchants, the Halls,
Yeah, and
Tufts.
with the foundation, there's still foundations there, right?
Well, the walls are still
The
there.
wall, is it protected, you can't go in there and, like, for his privies or historic, like, looking for, wells?
No, you can't do your,
No, or there anyone else,
well, certainly if somebody, if a researcher at a university had a grant and they went through DCR and probably consulted with Friends of the Fells also, there might be some amount of work that would be allowed, but it would be done very carefully.
is that happening?
I mean, Jack Ridge, who recently retired as a geologist from Tufts University, he's done magnificent work on mapping the geology of the fells. So he's tramped all over the fells. But, you know, he hasn't disturbed things. He has taken some rock cores, he's done thin sections and such, but he would have gotten permission through, DCR is aware of his work.
In 1994, the state did designate the Haywardville, Lossman Village area, which is right in here, as a spot pond archaeological district.
Haywardville.
Right. But to date, not much has been done. I mean, it really, there's not done much metal surveying,
Yeah.
take up all hinges or buttons or coins or whatever. That's all been pretty much,
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely findings to be had. I mean,
right.
in Victorian times, it was very fashionable to walk through the fells and pick up, you know, artifacts that were Native American artifacts, and pretty much all of the ones that were easy to find were collected at that time. And some of them, actually, unfortunately, they didn't say where they found the artifacts the way we would today. We'd be very careful about noting the locations. They didn't do that. They just put, you know, they'd walk around, they'd put their arrowheads and stone implements into, you know, a box. And fortunately, some of those are preserved at the Medford Historical Society. In fact, you can see them now. And some are also preserved at Breakheart Reservation Visitor Center. But, I mean, a lot of Native American artifacts, unfortunately, we just kind of went to people's houses for their own private, you know, collection.
Yes, and
Hi. So from the Native Americans you spoke of, what were the tribes that were here? Are there any remaining people related to those tribes that are still around?
Well, the Wampanoag
Wampanoag.
actually had a close relationship with Massachusetts tribe, and in fact, to this day, they are trying to, let people know that they feel that this land is actually part of their land, in association with the people that that did not survive the pandemics and the clearing out of the native. People were cleared out of the land, and you know, the last Native Americans were actually sent to Deer Island, and some were sent down to the Caribbean, to the sugar plantations. And you know, after King Philip's War, there was a lot of animosity towards the Native peoples, and it was basically free-for-all in, you know, capturing innocent Native peoples and enslaving them and then sending them mostly to Deer Island and to the Caribbean.
the Wampanoag is a federally recognized tribe, but the Massachusetts tribe is not.
Right.
There may be people who are members of the tribe, but they don't have the same status or, I guess, the recognition that they probably deserve, because they're probably too few in number.
Yeah, well, it's a work in progress. There's actually a lot of different branches of the Massachusetts, Pawtucket Nation, and the Wampanoag.
Mystics.
Pardon?
The Mystics.
Yeah, there's the Mystics. Yeah, there's a lot of different tribal branches, and you know it's an ongoing effort to identify members of tribes and to try to define what their homelands were, and you know, to bring out more history of you know, how they interacted. They do that through things that they traded amongst each other. They find similar you know, wampum and so forth that came from certain areas, and they link the artifacts with the people that lived there. And then, you know, they've been redrawing the maps of the tribes for quite a long time. There's actually a new one out fairly recently that it's not our area of expertise. We just touch on that. There's some good work being done though by actual tribal members.
Skipping 100 years or so up, coming into the 1700s. Has anybody ever done any study on the names of the different coves within Spot Pond, Hadley Cove, Porter's Cove, Gary's?
All I know is that they were, you know,
Were those
the
of
early
those
settlers in that
property
area. Anthony Hadley was a farmer who farmed in the southeastern shoreline of spot on.
Some had ice houses too.
Some had ice houses. So typically, there were identified people who lived there in the 1800s.
So this would have been before the Wyoming project on the west side.
Yeah, that was 1840s.
Yes, and so you look at old maps of the pond, and they'll like Hadley Cove, Borders Cove, and the Gary family up on the west side. And then there's Old Peeps Cove, and then some of them aren't named.
Okay,
I mean, it's,
I just wonder if they were the families that owned that property. at that
probably,
time.
right.
yeah.
They're all there in the Registry of Deeds, Cambridge. I went there many times, going back to 1640, the first deeds.
Yeah.
Where was this at?
Oh, in the
Middlesex?
South Middlesex Registry of Deeds, in Cambridge.
Yeah, I
Second
did that
Avenue.
also,
And
and
then there, the Legion
I
there.
gave up.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's,
Research your own house.
yeah,
history,
it's,
for
it's,
example.
it's a rich history, and, you know, you just can keep studying this stuff, you know, for the rest of your life. It's really a wonderful, you know, rich, body of history. And fortunately, a lot of it, some of it's preserved, some gets, you know, thrown out. People get rid of hard copies of things, and they just keep the digital copies, where they decide, oh, nobody's interested in this old stuff, and they just, you know, chuck it. But fortunately, there's enough people that are interested in history to, you know, try to grab onto those things. And we do have some good archivists in the state.
And just one other thing, in the Batum House in the basement, there are lots of artifacts in boxes, cardboard boxes with mold. And some of them are in plastic bags, and there's 100 artifacts from Hayward. Also from the Boston Harbor Islands, how they got there, I don't know. But they're in the basement, they're still there.
Well, hopefully, DCR will have the time and resources to display them as they deserve.
So
Yes.
I'm still not quite clear how the state got this property.
Oh, you're gonna have to read our book, Middlesex Fells. Yeah,
So
that detail.
So those merchants in Medford, did they donate the land or?
No, it was a preservation movement, which was headed by a number of people, but another one was Elijah Wright. The tower at the top of Pine Hill is named after him.
Okay,
But
so
it's
it's just.
It was a group of preservationists, and it was a movement. It was in the newspapers, and it was, you know, the politicians were involved. So, I don't want to keep, I know we're running out of time, so we're going to time for you to buy books if you like.
Just one other thing regarding that question, the Lawrence family down here, the southern part of the Fells, they donated Lawrence Woods in 1925, and got $50,000 for it. Or 85 acres. Yeah. So in many cases, the state paid for it.
Yeah, so yeah, it wasn't just taken from people, it was an exchange of money in most cases for
I
land.
think of about $500,000 was spent by the state.
But I have to say, Stoneman in particular was very generous in the amount that they gave. It became part of Middlesex Fells. So, we're gonna stay around for a little while and, sign books if you like. We actually charge, it's less than retail. We charge $20 for our books and $10 for our trail guides. And, we'd be happy if you don't have a, cash or check. We take book orders and we deliver for houses. We're working on getting Venmo, but we need to actually practice it a little bit before we use Venmo. So, because I did not do it well when I first tried. Anyway, so anything else? One more question?